from this to this to this. The telephone has been an innovation we couldn't live without today. The telephone was an important innovation because it led to communication being easier and faster across wide expanses, influenced the invention of the internet, and became an extremely popular innovation even though its numbers grew slowly as it started. The first words ever spoken over the telephone were, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want you," by Mr. Alexander Graham Bell. The telephone was invented in 1876 by Alexander Graham Bell, assisted by Mr. Thomas Watson. However, Alexander Graham Bell wasn't the only one trying to invent the telephone. Elijah Gray was also trying to invent it. The rivalry between these two inventors was one that went on for many years. Before they were trying to invent the telephone, they both tried to invent the harmonic telegraph. Without the harmonic telegraph, Alexander Graham Bell might not have been inspired to invent the telephone. Alexander Graham Bell won the patent for the great invention only by 2 hours, beating Elijah Gray to the United States Patent Office. Alexander Graham Bell's patent said, "I have invented," while Elijah Gray said, "I am working on an invention." There was one telephone in 1876, and by 1915 there were 11 million nationwide. The telephone was initially extremely popular and remains popular today. Many inventions such as the iPhone, the BlackBerry, and other types of mobile phones and cordless phones were influenced by the invention of the telephone. The telephone's journey down the road of fame. People originally thought that the telephone was a talking box with no real person on the other end because you could not see the person whom you were talking to. So it was very easy to see how people thought the telephone was strange. The newly invented telephone was very expensive when it first sold, and until about the 1960s, telephones were so expensive that most people could not afford them. My grandmother said, "Well, we didn't have a telephone growing up, so you could see that many people couldn't afford them." Also, some people were afraid of the telephone because they thought they could be seen by the person at the other end while using it. For this reason, some people wouldn't use the telephone until they were nicely dressed. Alexander Graham Bell had to think up great sales ideas to help sell the telephone at first because few people wanted to buy them. One of the reasons people did not want to pay for a telephone was the voices sounded fuzzy and unclear. People explained it like this: artillery can be heard, thunder can be heard. Artillery and thunder can be heard. As described in the book The Telephone by Sarah Gearhart. It wasn't as easy as it is today. Some people were afraid enough to make them speechless from fear. Many just thought it was a strange device, period, too strange to use. By 1915, much of these worries were over, and the telephone was becoming more popular with 11 million nationwide. This makes it one of the most popular inventions between 1876 and 1915, even though the price and lack of connection lines prevented everyone from being able to own one. My great-grandmother said, "Well, we didn't have a telephone growing up, so when you had to make a call, you had to run over to the store on the hill. There was a crank one on the wall, so you had to crank it up and then dial the operator." Even though it was hard for her to get to a telephone and use it correctly, my great-grandmother still thinks the telephone is an extremely great invention. Today there are over 100 million telephone lines, and more are being added every day. Influencing the invention of the Internet. 1969 will forever be remembered as the year of the Miracles Met and Neil Armstrong's walk on the moon. But as the Internet's influence continues to grow, maybe 1969 will come to be known as the year of the Internet, since it was 1969 that the Internet was launched. AT&T Enterprise. The AT&T website states it feels that the Internet would never have been possible without their involvement in telecommunications. In addition to their efforts in telecommunications, AT&T developed the Unix operating system, which works much the same as the Internet in the way that you can create messages and then save them until you want to send them. You could send a message to another user's screen and then it could be printed or saved again. The telephone and internet run on the same line, said Rika, a technical support worker for Comcast. This means that the telephone lines were the backbone for future DSL lines. If the internet uses the same lines as the telephone, shouldn't the telephone have influenced the invention of the internet? Shiv, a technical support agent from Microsoft, said, "Yes, I personally feel that the telephone influenced the internet." Shiv thinks this partly because he works for Microsoft, a leading internet provider and software creator. The internet itself would not exist if it were not for AT&T's telecommunication network, the electronic gateway that connects you to the rest of the world. AT&T Enterprise. Communication over greater expanses. Until the 1960s, voice communications between North America and the other continents was possible, but expensive. AT&T Enterprise. To speed up voice service, AT&T launched a giant balloon called Echo into the atmosphere. Echo worked a lot like a satellite. It had a smooth surface and it could reflect messages. 2 years after Echo was launched, the first real communications satellite, named Telstar, went into orbit. It entered Earth's atmosphere on July 10, 1962. AT&T, a telephone company, spent about $6 million to help Bell Laboratories develop this Telstar satellite. The New York Times asked Pradman P. Call, chief executive of Hughes Communications, "It seems that Americans communicate more via high-speed cable and digital subscriber telephone lines than via satellite, suggesting that satellites have not lived up to their purpose. Do you agree?" He replied, "No, each technology has its place in terms of applications and when it's used." Along with that, he described that if you want to broadcast a football game, then you could reach, instead of one person, about 1 million people with the satellite. The question the New York Times asked Pradman P. Call shows that the telephone eventually led to people wanting easier and faster ways to communicate, that the new ways of transmitting telecommunications followed to reach more people. It's just another, I'm not going to say advancement, evolutionary advancement. The telephone becomes an everyday thing, the internet becomes an everyday thing, the radio becomes an everyday thing, the television becomes an everyday thing. And it's just an advancement in the way of connecting people, says Judy Blake, Media Relations Specialist for Hughes Communications. Communication satellites were originally supposed to be for the telephone to broadcast signals, but now they are just used for television. Conclusion. Communication by telephone has become so common that people take it for granted, while others wanted to be able to talk without having to stay in one place. This led to home phones without cords. Cordless phones receive signals from a base unit attached to traditional phone lines, but the handset can work in one room while the base unit is in another. Even more popular with people today is the cellular or 3G phones. These use towers like older radio towers to broadcast communication signals between other towers and the cellular phones. With these phones, you can be very far away from the tower and still receive communication. They are also small so that people can carry them easily. The telephone has influenced other innovations like the microchip and satellite, and others that run on chips like the computer and GPS. The connection between the telephone and the history topic is clear. The telephone was one of the most important inventions, even though it took some time for everyone to take advantage of it. If the telephone was not invented, there would not have been many of the things there are today, like the cellular phone, being able to call 911, the GPS, the computer, the microchip, and more inventions. The telephone has allowed people to stay in contact with each other from far distances. Eric Snellman, a microbiologist from the FDA, explained the telephone's importance to him as, "My parents were divorced, so my dad could call me every week so I could stay in contact with him and let him know what was going on when I couldn't see him. The telephone helped him be closer to his family."